All right, welcome to this explainer. If you're anything like me, you've probably heard this line, I don't know, 1,000 times. It's in documentaries, textbooks, basically scattered all over pop culture. The story goes, Albert Einstein looks at the totally bizarre world of quantum physics and famously dismisses it as spooky action at a distance. Right? I mean, it's arguably the most quoted insult in the entire history of science. It just perfectly captures the mind-bending weirdness of the quantum realm straight from the mouth of its biggest skeptic.
But wait, hold on just a second. Did Einstein actually say it? Or, well, maybe the better question is, did he say it about the specific phenomenon we all think he was talking about? Today, we are going to completely deconstruct this legendary piece of science trivia. Seriously, stick with me here, because discovering the historical truth behind this, it's going to fundamentally change how you think about one of the most famous quotes in all of physics.
Okay, let's dive right into this. You open almost any book on quantum physics, and you're going to find the exact same story set up regarding quantum entanglement. At its core, entanglement is when two particles, separated by literally impossible distances, somehow become inextricably linked. And physics still struggles to intuitively explain the mechanism here. You measure one particle, and boom, the other one instantly responds, no matter how far apart they actually are, and with absolutely no visible signal ever passing between them. No way, right? And then comes the kicker in the popular story. Even the great Albert Einstein supposedly thought this was just too weird, throwing his hands up in the air and calling it spooky action at a distance. It's a beautifully simple story. It's snappy, highly quotable, attached to a legendary name, and it makes entanglement feel even more deeply mysterious.
But when you actually dig into the historical archives and read Einstein's original letters, well, a massive, far more interesting reality emerges. The truth is, he probably wasn't talking about entanglement at all, at least definitely not in the tidy little way those documentaries presented. Now don't get me wrong here, entanglement really is strange. That part of the story is completely true, no matter how you slice it. Two particles really can share a connection across any distance, but the famous quote itself, that has a totally different origin story.
So let's rewind the history a bit and see how this actually builds. Look at that number, 20. That represents 2 full decades. Literally 20 years of relentless, heated arguments between Einstein and his old friend, the brilliant physicist Max Born. Their massive disagreement actually traces all the way back to the famous Bohr-Einstein debates of the 1920s. And by the time we get to the late 1940s, 20 years later, Einstein still hadn't let the argument go, not even a little bit.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the physical evidence itself, because this exact phrase starts with a real physical letter written in Einstein's own handwriting that is literally sitting in an archive right now. On March 3, 1947, Einstein sat down in Princeton and wrote a letter to Max Born over in Germany. And in that letter, writing in his native German, he used the phrase spukhafte Fernwirken. Translated into English, yep, that's spooky action at a distance. That right there is the entire origin of one of the most repeated quotes in science communication. It was just a private letter between two old friends written decades before entanglement was even a common word in the public vocabulary.
And this brilliantly illustrates the massive gap between what we're told and what actually happened. The popular myth tells us that Einstein just dropped a tidy, cutting soundbite specifically about two entangled particles flying apart from each other. But the historical reality, that 1947 letter wasn't some quick quip. It was a complaint about something much, much bigger. Einstein was actually rejecting the entire statistical interpretation of physics that Max Born had helped create. He wrote that he simply couldn't believe in this statistical approach, stating that physics should describe a real world in space and time, totally free of spukhafte Fernwirken. So it was actually a foundational, philosophical rejection of quantum mechanics itself.
Let's trace exactly how this unfolded, because the timeline is, well, it's pretty wild. Einstein's real objection actually went back even further in time than entanglement itself ever did. At the 1927 Solvay conference, this is 8 years before entanglement formally entered the conversation, he raised this exact worry about action at a distance, using just a single particle diffracting through a tiny hole. Then we hit 1935, when Einstein writes the famous EPR paper. And here is a crazy semantic surprise for you. It was Erwin Schrödinger who actually coined the term Verschränkung, which is German for entanglement, specifically in response to that 1935 paper. Think about that for a second. By the time Einstein writes that 1947 letter to Born, he clearly knew the concept, yet he never once used the word entanglement in that letter. Finally, we reach the 1960s with John Bell's theorem, which completely changes the game.
So the absolutely crucial point here is understanding Einstein's true stance. It's a huge misconception that Einstein thought entanglement-style correlations were completely fake. He didn't.
He actually thought they were real results of a real experiment. What he firmly refused to accept was the explanation quantum mechanics gave for why they happened. His position was that quantum mechanics must simply be an incomplete description of physical reality. He was convinced there had to be deeper, hidden properties that the particles carried with them from the very start. Kind of like, a pair of matching gloves separated into two different boxes. You open one, you instantly know what's in the other. He was hoping quantum mechanics would eventually be replaced by a fully deterministic theory of nature. It's a powerful reminder that even the greatest scientific minds prefer an intuitive universe over an unpredictable one.
So you're probably wondering, how exactly did a phrase from a private 1947 letter about statistical mechanics get practically stolen and repurposed as the ultimate pop science quote for entanglement? Well, it's all about how quotes take on a life of their own once they're loose out in the wild. First, in the 1960s, physicist John Bell figured out a theorem that made entanglement actually testable in the lab. Suddenly, this wasn't just a philosophical debate anymore, you could measure it. Once Bell's theorem gave physicists a way to rigorously test this non-local weirdness, the phrase became the obvious, almost irresistible caption. The catchy 1947 phrase gets completely detached from its highly complicated original context. And finally, that vivid, memorable quote is reattached to the phenomenon it describes best. I mean, it had Einstein's name on it, it was snappy, and it just felt right. So it's stuck forever.
But history and science march on, right? The final verdict on this decades-long debate? Well, Einstein turned out to be wrong about his hidden properties, at least in the simple, deterministic form he originally imagined. Bell's theorem and the countless rigorous experiments that followed over the decades, including the incredible work that won the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics, they proved him wrong. Einstein lost the fight. The spookiness that he so desperately wanted to explain away turned out to be a real, irreducible feature of nature itself. Spooky wasn't really his verdict on entanglement, it was his verdict on an entire interpretation of physics. He spent the second half of his life hoping to replace that interpretation, and ultimately, the universe disagreed with him.
So strictly speaking, the phrase is genuinely his, it's genuinely from 1947, and it's genuinely about quantum mechanics. But if you want to experience the raw, unfiltered arguments rather than just the flattened pop culture sound bites that try to condense a 20-year debate, I highly recommend checking out the Born Einstein Letters. They were published in 1971, and the book even includes commentary from Max Born himself. It's a genuinely fascinating resource if you want to sit back and watch these two incredibly brilliant minds battling it out over the very fabric of reality.
Getting to the historical truth behind the science we just take for granted reveals exactly how beautifully messy the pursuit of knowledge really is. If tearing apart these popular myths and looking at the real science through these explainers is your kind of thing, I absolutely want to hear from you. Which famous science quote or supposed historical fact should we investigate and unpack next? Let me know in the comments. And hey, don't forget to follow along so you don't miss our next deep dive. Keep questioning everything, and I'll see you in the next explainer.